Folks, joining us right now is Bishop William Barber with Repairs of the Breach, Poor People's Campaign. Bishop, always glad to have you. Happy New Year, frat. This is taking place in North Carolina, but this is really a national call.
It is, Roland. Thank you for having me, and glad to be here. I'm at a place I can't be on the line, but I'm glad to be with you. We must nationalize state movements. I don't know how many times I can say that. We need to be rallying the people in our states, and it doesn't even have to be partisan, it can be principled, and mobilize in a way around what we stand for. What is it that you stand for and that you will stand for, no, regardless of what we've talked enough. We have to do the critique, but resistance only gets you so far. The Bible says you have to write the vision for people to run, and you have to write it for people to mobilize. And we have to get people to grab their passion and say, I'm fighting now, not just who I'm against, but what I'm for. And Roland, the reality is, I can talk all day. It's one of the reasons I'm going home. I've been out in the nation, but going home to nationalize this. In North Carolina in 2025, Trump won by 180,000 votes, 1,830 votes per county. Over 300,000 Black folk that were registered and had voted infrequently didn't vote. Over 1.7 million poor and low wage people who had voted were registered but voted infrequently and didn't vote. And you look at these numbers in Georgia, Trump wins by a little over 100,000 votes, but over 300,000, 400,000 African Americans didn't vote. Over 2 million poor and low wage people who had infrequently voted and tended to vote progressive did not vote. And people are saying, what you ask them why, and they say, nobody talked to us, nobody spoke to our passion. I don't totally agree with that, but my point is, there comes a time when you can't just say what Goliath is doing. You have to decide it's time to take the mic from Goliath and say what you stand for and what rocks you stand on, if you will, Roland. And that's why we're going from the last straw was for them to get a. This is how it went down. Trump called our state, MAGA, and told them, take this district, first congressional district, predominantly Black. And they said, okay, and went down and redistricted it. But the numbers they use, Roland, they are based on 49% turnout or less. And in that same district, Trump won by 11,000 votes, but the hundreds of thousands of folks didn't vote at all in that district.
Yep,
And
yep.
we're saying to folks that you can't keep just resisting and talking about what is it that we are fighting for. 3 days we marched from Wilson to Raleigh, and then a massive. And lastly, you know this, it's not just a rally. People are going to get that day on live
Hmm.
stream with 7 things to do what you and I call micro organizing. Back
That's
at
right.
yeah,
Well, here's a perfect example. I'm showing right now. This was when we were in Austin,
right.
and this is a drone shot we had, and it was a multi-day march to the state capitol, and you were there. Beto O'Rourke was out there. Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. was out there, and the thing that so this was July 2021. So here we
That's right.
sit, January 2026. We saw what Texas did, stealing 5 seats. We saw how they passed all of these voting laws. And I remember there were people who were then saying, "All right, man, y'all sitting here, you're doing this march." But as we said, we talk about micro to macro. The problem with so many of these other folk out here, they want to have one big old rally, get lots of attention, and then you go, okay, well, what the hell you do? What's next? And all I've heard in the past year, Bishop, and you and I talk about this all the time. I've heard more people say, "Hey, man, who's doing something? We're waiting. We're ready to go. We're
Oh,
ready to do this thing." And the problem is too many organizations, too many churches, too many Black churches, too many civil rights groups, others. They've been non-existent. Chatting with doing email fundraisers, And the people are saying, where's the plan of action to fight back?
That's right. Where's the plan of action, and what is it that we're fighting for, and how are we mobilizing so that it's a movement, not just a moment? When we went to Texas, as you remember, about 100 folks started with us, but thousands showed up. Now, we encourage people, you and I, to keep doing it, right? To keep going, build it out. Folks said we never seen this many people come to the State House at one time. We said, if you keep moving and keep mobilizing. Now let's now go from that to the fact that you've got 3 million poor and low wage folk and frequent voters. Go after them, but you got to go after them with talking to them and real policies. The problem is, Roland, too often we're leaving folk out. And I'm saying to politicians, you can't just run this year on who you're against. What are you for? What's going to happen if you get to be the governor or the senator or whatever? What's going to happen in the first 50 days? What are you going to make happen? And all of us, the organizations, if you've been waiting to do something, I mean, when the big, bad, deadly, ugly, destructive bill, you know, you were there. Some of us, white and black and other, went to DC and made a call. Come now. Come to the rotunda now. They arrested us. I know folks saw it because millions of people saw it online. But do you know some folk were doing something else? I don't know what they were doing. And then after it was over, they said, we didn't know. Now, there's a certain part at which you can't be claim ignorance, you know. But let's just say folk didn't. Okay, here we are now, 22 million people. 20 million people are losing health care. That's who you got to organize. That's the power. People are losing food stamps. That's who we must mobilize. So our effort, and I'm saying, Roland, every state ought to have this. And preachers, hear me. You ought to do this in your state. You ought to get thousands and thousands of people, have a massive group, but not just for a day. And then you ought to lay out your plan for micro mobilizing and organizing and civic engagement and voter push in each county. And Roland, you know why we're doing February 11th, 12th, and 13th? It's not just because it's Valentine's Day. It's the first week of early voting, same day registration. So we're going to
Right.
be
So
out there sending it up.
that's called having a reason, having a
Right.
rationale in terms of what you're doing, and not just gathering because you meet and you're pushing people towards something to do something. Because is that also that's when early voting starts in Texas for the March 6th primary.
That's it. And I would love it. We're trying to model. It would be an amazing if there are any folk from Texas right now and preachers down there, you all could do this. Go join us. Do one the same weekend. You can do it in you could do this in 3 weeks. Bayard Rustin didn't have a 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks at the most, to pull off the March on Washington. You can't. We could. What if Texas decided after all of this craziness that you were going to mobilize, and let's say you didn't march 3 days, but you did one somewhere and massively come on February. But your reason is to gin up the energy and the power of people turning out for early voting. I don't, in Texas, do you have same day registration, Roland? I don't know if
We do
Texas
not
does.
have not in
Right.
Texas.
That's right. But see, we do. So what we're saying to folks, while we're marching, the church we're marching from, by the way, is on Martin Luther King Boulevard, St. James Christian Church. My wife's the pastor. The church we're going to end up at is Pullen Memorial Church, which has been a progressive white congregation on the 13th. But what we're saying to folks is the 12th, the 13th, the 14th are all same day registration early voters. So while we're walking, you march to the polls, and you don't even have to be registered. All you have to do is go and register and vote. And then after that rally, when we really ginned up and taken over the news media and got people's consciousness awakened and gotten people saying, I know what I'm loving, I know what I'm fighting for, they will have another 3 to 4 weeks to push it out. And we're gonna break through so that the pundits are gonna have to say, wait a minute, we normally don't get this kind of turnout in midterm elections. And that's when we start making a difference, when we start upsetting these calculations.
To your point, I'm playing right now a video when we were with y'all in June, and it was very interesting. It's very interesting. Again, the whole point there, and this is the thing that still, to your point, would drive me crazy. Y'all invited so many other people. This was in June. The whole point was to build upon that, and y'all keep doing the work. And you can do all you can do is all you can do.
Mm.
But you got so many other folk who've been sitting on the sidelines and just sort of, and I guess they're gonna wake up come September and October. And
Okay.
what I have been saying to people repeatedly is, y'all, this ain't how this thing works. You now have to begin to reach people a lot earlier. This is now January. You have to be now planting the seed in January, and you got to till the soil, and you got to water that thing in February and March, and they may not vote in the primary, but then you got April and May and
That's right.
June and July and August and September and October. If you do that, you've now spent 7, 8 months, what I call educate, enlighten, inform, and engage.
I
And
love
when
that.
you do that, the three E's in the I, you do that. Now all of a sudden you built the resonance, and now people know you've connected the dots. You've talked about healthcare. You talked about SNAP benefits. You talked about job creation. You talked about a living wage. And now you can challenge the candidates. Because look, we want to hold these town halls for the folk who run. Roy Cooper,
That's right.
we, we want to have a town hall with him on the Black Star Network in North Carolina, Ossoff in Georgia, Crockett
Uh,
in Texas, the rest of these people. But that's what has to happen.
and Roland, and if you do that, you as you said, you actually push to the politicians to have courage and to say what they're for, not just what they're against. And so the other part of what we're doing, we've been in the first congressional district since they did what they did. We filed a suit challenging it as racism. But we also are not in those districts having town halls, all those counties down east. And folks said, well, you need to wait till after Christmas. We said, why? Why did you all have to
Right,
wait till after a holiday? We went in Christmas. We're going to do as a part of this gathering a 7-stop tour across North Carolina leading up to this, ginning people up, educating people, making sure they know what's going on, doing nonpartisan voter guides that tell on people. We don't tell you who to vote for, but we can tell on them. And then you have to look at it and say, well, I love this, but I don't like this. But you got to do this work early and hard. If we mess around and say what we're going to do is have a remember March on Washington, wait all the way till August. Now that's after the summer. Then try to jam that out in September and October. That I'm not saying some of that won't help, but it's why. And why take it all the way to DC when you can do it in these states and
right,
massively in the states? I don't know why we can't get this. DC changed from Birmingham up, from Alabama up,
right,
Jackson up, from Montgomery up, from Selma up, not from DC down. And that was where the effort. I was looking the other day, Roland, and I challenged for not last thing I'll say. I went back and read the speech that you and I often read, which is the speech Dr. King gave at the State House at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March when they actually
mm-hmm,
told him that he was going to get shot. They told him don't do that speech, but he did it anyway, and he did it long. I mean, it was longer than the March. I have the enormity never again, which we call I Have a Dream. It was like 45 minutes. But in that speech, he makes the point and says the work that has been done across this nation grew out of the work done in 3 places: Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. And I thought about that, Roland. Yes, the movement's known all across the world, but Doc's primary focus was Alabama and Georgia. Now he did.
mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? He made sure that he did hard work. We often talk about Doc as a speaker, and we try to isolate him as an individual. But no, no, no. Go back. Birmingham, Montgomery, Selma. Right? Without those 3 things he says in those speeches, they would not have built the models and the basis. And what other folk did was they picked up what they saw. So I'm saying to folk, you don't have to wait right now. Take this model in North Carolina. What if a 50 or 100 pastors decide to do this in Texas and then in Georgia? Do your state and look at these numbers. If you gin up 10% of just black folk who didn't engage in the last election, and then gin up 10% of poor and low wage people that didn't engage around an election, you can flip almost any state, even these southern states, in particular in the at-large elections.
Questions for my panel. Michael, you first.
All right, Reverend William Barber, I think this is fantastic. And my question to you is for the people, for some of the people who are with you in this movement now, they say, yes, brother, we get it, we're with you, but they didn't vote in November 2024 election. What are some of the driving issues that cause them to realize, okay, we have to be engaged now? What are some of the driving issues or the reasons that
Yeah.
cause them to say, okay, we get it now?
Well, let me say a couple of things. I'm glad you raised that question because I just got out of a 3-hour session yesterday. I'm like Roland, I'm a fact person, I'm a numbers person. So
Me too.
we touched 11 million poor and low wage voters 3 times during the last election, a nonpartisan way, but in a very powerful way. We just had our statisticians and our meet with us, our team, to go over those numbers last week and then yesterday. And we found out that in the places where we were, and we know that they clicked on our text or they played, because we sent people a video, a nonpartisan report card, and a text message, that there was no less than an 8% uptick in among those folk who were infrequent voters. Now, part of the issue is if we'd had more resources, we could have done it more because the extremists are hitting their people 12 times.
Right.
See, there's been that we too often, and the voters we were going after, a lot of people, so-called progressive folk, don't even they ignore them. That's one of the reasons people don't vote. We did a study and they said nobody talks to us. So you can reach them. Now, to your point though, we are in a moment now where people have been hit. Like, you remember that commercial when it says, "Thanks, I needed that." Remember you put on
Yes.
that? Great. Well, when these folk lost their health care and losing their SNAP, they're seeing more money put in ICE than put in public education. I mean, you start looking at this, there is a level of pain now that has people wide awake. Our job now is to connect that pain to their power and show them you don't have to be suffering like this. Doc, here's the statistic that is gonna make somebody roll on your show cuss, and it's okay. The current Congress that we have in office right now is there because of a 7,000 vote margin
Right.
in a time when 90 million people didn't vote. We have to start getting folk to understand that so they can own their power.
Yep.
They can own their power. And every time I say that, when I go places and say that, and then I start telling people, did you realize in your state such and such and such thing? Folks say, well, damn. And that's what I want them to say. I want them to understand all this nonsense about it doesn't make a difference. It's just nonsense. It's robots lying to you on social media. It's not real people who know the deal. And now in the midst of this, we've got to help folk understand if you love living wages, because right now you got a group of folk, they are thinking about nothing but firing you. If you love health care for everybody, not just access, but actual health care for everybody, if you love society where we don't have to keep suffering ICE raids and we can welcome immigrants, if you love expanded and protected voting rights, if you love a society where the military is checked and not unchecked, and our cities aren't militarized, then you've got to turn that love and that passion into power, and you have it, and it's real and it's possible. That's what I think, my brother. It can help folk who were sitting on the sidelines no longer sit there. And lastly, what's so powerful about this is you don't even have to get 100% of the folk that sat out. In most of these places, if you do the hard numbers, and that's why I'm
Yep.
hoping their preacher groups meeting. I hope they got some statisticians in these meetings and not just saying cute things about Trump. The power is sometimes in as little as an 8% or 10% turnout of the folk that didn't turn out.
Absolutely. Matt.
Reverend Dr. Barber, my question for you is kind of a cousin of Michael's, and it's how much do you think there's going to be an influx, particularly of white voters who sat on the sideline, maybe who were Trump adjacent or Trump, I don't know, favorable, who didn't participate, who may now be spurred into participation because of economic issues, law enforcement issues. What is your thought on that and how that might affect either the midterms or just the ability to galvanize people actually getting out?
Well, remember Dr. King said the greatest fear of the greedy oligarchy in this country is for the masses of poor black people and poor low-wage white people and others to join together and form a voting bloc that can fundamentally shift the economic architecture. He knew that in 65, which is why Dr. King began to mobilize black and white and brown and native and others. The reality is, I'm going to give you a stat uh, that there's a study that came out that said 19 million Biden voters didn't vote. Uh, that voted for Biden didn't vote for Trump, not didn't vote for Kamala, but voted for Trump. Didn't vote. But when they asked them, the number one reason they didn't vote was there was not a clear mentioning of of how poor and low wage people would be addressed, particularly on the issue of living wages and health care. Now that's a study that just recently came out. We found out in another study that Trump only got 51% of poor and low wage voters. That means $50,000 a year in a family of four, regardless of their white, only 51%. But that was the first time he or any other Republican got 51% of that population. But we also know that we did not see a clear pitch, particularly to folk, whether they be white people in East Kentucky or black people in the Delta, with an economic message and a message that connects racism and economics. So my point is, I think that we're in a time when a lot of folk who did not vote, as you heard me say, in 2024, uh, 1.7 million poor and low wage people in North Carolina didn't vote. That's black, white, whatnot. But now we've got 300,000 people who've lost their Medicaid and 300,000 who've lost their food stamp, those SNAP. If you connect that pain to this moment and people understand it, I think you're going to see a large number of folks. And the challenge for us in this moment, though, and I'll be very honest with you, is wherever we're meeting, I'm asking people to do a thorough look at the outcome from the last election. We also have to look at the fact that somewhere almost near 20% of black males voted for Trump.
Yeah.
That black vote went down in Georgia among women. We've got to be honest about that too. So what we got to look at is how do we build this team that Martin knew was the very thing the oligarchs feared, and particularly how do we as black folk help build that? We don't build it with everybody, but if we build it with the right folk, we can fundamentally break through the Southern strategy. And lastly, remember what the Southern strategy said. It said we must make sure that blacks and whites never find themselves united in election. We must foster division at every turn. And in a book called A Time of Illusion, they said we might create a Frankenstein. If we do, we will lie. But in the meantime, positive polarization is the way we win. Now, if that's their strategy and has been for the last 50 years, then our strategy has to be the opposite.
Thank you.
Candace.
Reverend Dr. Barber, in terms of where the people are to go and meet them and let them know the issues, to let them know the dates, where would you say those places are? Is it the church? Is it going door to door? Are there other ways that you are finding that the people that need to get to the polls can be reached? What are those doors that you might be opening that might be new, that folks might not think of in terms of how to get folks who haven't voted out to the box?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I might, as they say, take a scripture. When after the day of Pentecost, the people were told that this is how you organize people. You start in Jerusalem, you go to Judea, you go to Samaria, and then you go to the uttermost parts of the world. So let's just say I'm a church and we've got folk that's ready to go out and mobilize. First thing you do is make sure everybody in your church is mobilized. Don't let them folk lie to you. Don't think just because you got 20,000 folks sitting up on Sunday morning that they actually turn it out. You need to have a mobilization team right inside the congregation, right? Number one. Number two, draw a 5 mile circle around your church, that building where it sits, and make that your next target. And inside of that target, go to the communities closest to your church that represent poor and low wage voters, because the greatest potential for expanding the vote is among the 80 million poor and low wage voters. In the last couple of elections, 30 million of them didn't vote. And you heard me say the number one reason is no one talks to them. Number two, make sure you understand that you can't just preach a sermon on this. It has to be strategic. And then you must take the church into the street. I don't believe in just like preaching in the pulpit. You wherever there's places in the hood, places in communities. And remember, when I say poor and low wage and low wealth, I'm not talking about somebody just $20,000 a year in a family. From $50,000 in a family of four down is where we've got to. 50,000 down. So wherever those pockets are, and if you're mobilizing, in other words, we also have to mobilize from the Delta to Appalachia, from the Delta to Appalachia. Uh, I'll tell you a quick story and I'll stop. When Bashir won in Kentucky, y'all know the new guy. We were mobilizing in Kentucky, in Louisville, and in Hazard County. Now you know the Dukes of Hazard, right?
Yes.
Folks said, "Barbara, you are crazy. They're gonna get you out there in Hazard." But what folk didn't know is that in Hazard County and Harlan County, those are the counties from which Justice Harlan came, who was the only Supreme Court justice to vote against Plessy versus Ferguson. They didn't realize that Harlan County and Hazard County are the counties where the song "Which Side Are You On" was written by a white woman who challenged the coal bosses and the government people who were dropping bombs on top of the miners, black and white miners, who were working together in those coal mines. So we went out there and we mobilized and we showed people how they were being fooled and bamboozled. And we challenged anybody who was running to come out there. We didn't endorse a candidate. When we left, Bashir heard the challenge and started changing his schedule. And he didn't just go to Lexington and Louisville. He started going out, not sending somebody, but going out to those counties. And we kept mobilized. Do you know that 4 of those 6 counties flipped
Mm,
in
mm,
Kentucky? And he unseated an incumbent Republican governor in Kentucky. And the night that he won, he paid homage to what he had learned in the movement. He said, "I found out this in running this time that some issues aren't black versus white, they are right versus wrong. Some issues aren't Republican versus Democrat, they are right versus wrong. Some issues are not partisan, they are moral. And he committed to felony reenfranchisement. He committed to restore health care to because he found out a lot of those folk in Eastern Kentucky lost their health care, right? It wasn't just black folk. He found out, but he also found out that raising wages and union, and guess what? He's won a second term.
Mm.
My point is, this can happen, but we have to, as you say, go to the way you do it is you've got to do a race and an economic mapping of your community, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where you go. And the target when we talk about poor and low wage is again $50,000 and low in a family of four. That's what we call poor and low wage.
Thank you.
And you can't do that unless you actually take the time and understand the data. You got to pull the data to understand what's going on. You can't just have these verbal conversations, anecdotal and stuff along those lines. And you got to, we talk about micro. You got to sit here and you got to say, all right, leaving this rally, collect the data on who's here. Now we're going to need folk to target not just county, city, neighborhood, blocks, streets, houses. It
That's
can't
right.
just be preachers. It can't just be preachers standing in the pulpit saying,
Mm-hmm.
I need y'all to go out and vote. No, the preachers need to be saying, there's a 0.05, a 0.10, a 0.25 mile radius around the church, and we gonna knock on doors in
Mm-hmm.
our radius. That's how this thing is gonna happen. Because to your point,
Right.
Trump is there because of 7,000 votes. They can lose if you mobilize 7, 10, 20, 30, 40,000 people, and that's just done one by one. That's micro to macro. You can't do macro to micro.
No. And I want y'all to hear what Ramona and I are saying. The current Congress that is turning loose this president, most of what he's done, he could not have done it without the Congress, right? He could not have passed a big, deadly, ugly, destructive bill. He would not be able to do the tariffs. He would not been able to have unchecked militarism. Mike Johnson is the speaker because of 7,000 votes in a time when 90 million people didn't vote.
Mm.
And what we should have is our best people. Cornell is one of them. I talk to Cornell all the time. Cecilia Lake is another who focus on these. And you can get it, as Rose said, all the way down to the block. And you target infrequent vote. In other words, these are people who vote, but for some reason they're infrequent. And if you target poor and low wage infrequent voters, up until last year, the majority of poor and low wage folk, when they voted, tend to vote progressive. Now, when you start getting over that 50,000 and you talk about those are the quote unquote whites, if you will, that tend to vote so extreme, is those a little bit. But the reality is, and we blame poor folk for a lot of stuff. The reality is most poor folk have stayed home, right? They don't vote because they say nobody talks to us, nobody comes to see us, nobody targets their ads to us. Think about it. When's the last time you've heard a presidential debate where the issue of poverty even got 5 minutes of discussion? Think about it, except on Roland show, right? So the point is, the data tells us that those folk there's 83 million of them. 57 million voted in the last election. Some 30 million didn't. When we did our targeting, we said to our data folk, we want to reach 15 million, half of the infrequent, poor, and low wage voters. And I'm gonna tell you, Roland, that what we found out yesterday, and the guy who talked to us and helped us go through the numbers, he said, Reverend Barber, the only reason that you all didn't have a more impact was resources because you
Boom.
couldn't touch them as much. And he said, and the guy said, it's a shame that folks spent billions of dollars on these consultants and everybody else. And nobody, when they heard what the program you're doing, and this is nonpartisan, didn't at least say, we'll put enough money here so you can reach these folk 10 times. He said that the methodology is right. It's the funding, and we got to understand everybody's not interested in all the people participating because it would shift the power. But if we say to folks, of all our talk, 7,000 votes in the Congress and who people voted for made the difference between whether or not you have who you have leading the Congress.
That's
That
it.
ought to be both frightening, but it also ought to be encouraging because it tells us that winning now is whether or not we're going to intensify and embolden our voting power agitation.
That's it. Folks, February 11th through the 14th, taking place in North Carolina, blackstarnetwork.com. Put the graphic up, please. Blackstarnetwork.com will be on the ground in support of this with Bishop William Barber, Repairs of the Breach Poor People's Campaign. Again, this is taking place on February 11th through the 14th. We'll be running that promo video. We're going to have more details about this. But again, folks, what Bishop said, this is not just about North Carolina. You should be mobilizing, organizing in your state as well. Bishop, always a pleasure. Appreciate it.
Take care. Take care. God bless. Forward together.
At the end of the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, Dr. King stood in front of the Alabama State House and told 25,000 Americans that the greatest threat to the greedy oligarchy is when poor blacks and poor whites and others mobilize together and form a voting bloc that can fundamentally shift the economic architecture of our nation. In America today, we have fewer voting right protections than we did when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965. And state legislatures have abused their power to try to pick their voters rather than let the voters pick their legislators. Meanwhile, every day people are suffering while the greedy get richer and richer. Dr. King was right, and many others were right. The billionaires who think they can buy our politicians are afraid of people coming together across dividing lines and building power together. In 2013 and 2014, we together in this state built out the Moral Monday movement. And in 2014, more than 80,000 people showed up in Raleigh for a mass people's assembly. We mobilized our power. We mobilized our vision. We did not continue to just resist what others were doing. We claimed the world that we wanted, the society that we wanted. And what we did energized. It was not partisan, it was principled. Here we are again now in 2026, and it's time to love forward together and mobilize. This is our Selma moment, and we need everybody, regardless of your race, your creed, your color, your religion, your sexuality, whoever you are. If you love voting rights for all, if you love abolishing poverty and bringing into reality living wage, if you love health care for all, if you love and grace and mercy and do not want to buy into the religious nationalism of hate and meanness and a lack of empathy, if you want to love forward together, welcoming immigrants rather than suffering ICE raids, if you love the environment and want to see it cared for rather than the polluters taking over, if you love fully supported public education, if you want to love, not hate, and to have peace and not war, to stand against unchecked militarization and the militarization of our cities, then it is time to come together and mobilize our power and our passion for justice. Then we now are in a moment where we must move from resistance to loving forward and mobilizing our power. So from February 11th through the 14th, North Carolinians are going to be walking and marching and caravanning from Wilson to Raleigh. And on Saturday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, we will hold a massive people's assembly for a moral agenda in Raleigh, North Carolina, saying it is time to love forward together. We are marching from a district that MAGA extremists, because of a call from President Trump, decided to gerrymander the 1st Congressional District, take it away from the people. And we are inviting all defenders of democracy and champions of the common good to meet us in Raleigh on February 14th to reclaim a moral agenda, an agenda for going forward, to pursue the society and the democracy that we want, not only for ourselves, but for our children's children. For somebody's been hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be quiet anymore. We will love forward together.